Hello everyone. Again, my name is James Keller. I'm the SOLIDWORKS subject matter expert and instructional designer here at I Get It. And today we're going to be looking at DriveWorksXpress. DriveWorksXpress is basically a SOLIDWORKS add-in, or a tool rather, that allows you to automate your design processes. So in the case where you have like a base model where you often have to do slight changes to it, or one-off changes where maybe a dimension's changed or a new feature is added here and there, but it's not a big change from the base model. It is a great tool to automatically drive those changes rather than going off and doing it yourself or having a designer spend time doing those changes. So some of the benefits of DriveWorksXpress are it helps you minimize errors by using rule-based inputs. Basically, they're just form inputs that that capture geometry from a model and push out model variants. So it also helps you save time by creating the models in a fraction of the time it would to take a designer to go in and do it by hand. And again, it saves the designer from being a little bored and having to do repetitive tasks, that may not really require much thought and innovation. So it frees them up to innovate and come up with some new, more important stuff. It lowers your costs, again, by spending less time on one-off design, and it enhances your production. And if you're familiar with configurations, you know that you can already do this type of stuff through them by just going in and picking a configuration for a base model that suits your need. But for some things, you might end up having thousands of configurations, hundreds of configurations, and it's a little tough to go in there and find what you're looking for, and it makes the model or assembly pretty heavy. And then again, you can also pump out a drawing along with these model variations. So without any really designer input for SOLIDWORKS, you can create a new model variation and an associated drawing. So it's a pretty powerful tool. In today's session, we're going to focus on a wheel and tire project. I chose this because there are tons of possible variations with the combination of rim sizes and wheel widths and tire heights. So having configurations to represent all the possible combinations of these would be a pretty big part. So this is a good tool for that. It's simpler than using design tables. If you are familiar with automating your designs in SOLIDWORKS, you could do similar things with design tables, but the form inputs used in DriveWorksXpress are much more intuitive, and it allows someone who's not familiar with SOLIDWORKS at all, or even the design tables for Excel-based tables, to go in and just basically create the design they're looking for. Could be a shop tech or even the customer. And again, it'll give you it'll create an associated drawing there with the variant. The things we're going to go over today. First, we're going to capture the model and the model data. These are the dimensions and features in the model that are actually driven by the values that you input in the form. Next, we'll go ahead and create the input form. This is basically where you define the values that are input by the customer or the tech or what have it. And then we're going to define the rules. The rules are used to basically link the input form with the model data and actually push the changes. So these are equation-based rules, basic logic. If you're not that familiar with logic, don't feel too bad there. It's pretty easy stuff, and the rule builder helps you out. It's not hard at all. And then we'll go ahead and produce a model variation and a drawing based on that variation. So to start, if you have never used an Express tool in SOLIDWORKS, they require activation. Now, DriveWorksXpress does come free with every seat of SOLIDWORKS, but you still need to go to mysolidworks.com/express. And if you don't already have a profile for mysolidworks.com, you can set it up and enter your product key there. And once you get to that point, they'll give you an activation code. And then when you go to actually launch DriveWorksXpress, it'll just prompt you to enter that code. And you just have to do that once. So every time you go back in the future, you don't have to worry about having to do that code each time. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up SOLIDWORKS here. And you can see my wheel and tire model here. Pretty straightforward. I use express work assemblies or parts. There's no difference between the two. Parts are just a little bit more simple, so for the purpose of this demonstration, I just chose to go with the part. I also have it for capture annotation setup. These are the dimensions I'm going to capture here shortly, and they're actually going to drive the model changes. So I'll double click on that to show you these. You might also notice that I'm dealing with inches here for the rim size and millimeters for the tire size. This is, not only kind of a standard in the industry, but it'll allow me to build some more complicated rules when we get to that point, just to show you all the things that DriveWorksXpress can do. Besides that, it's a pretty straightforward model. So let's go ahead and get into DriveWorksXpress. DriveWorksXpress can be activated from the Evaluate toolbar here, or you can go into Tools, Express Products, DriveWorksXpress. It'll open in the task pane. We're going to go ahead and pin that here just to make sure it doesn't close on us. And you see the three options here. Create a new database, add models to an existing database, or run models from an existing database. Now, since we don't have a database created already, I only have this one option available to me. So with it toggled, I'll go ahead and hit Next. So it's just going to prompt me for a place to save the database. I'm going to go in here in this database folder, and we'll call it Wheel and Tire. Now you can see it here populated in the active database. Next, we need to add models. And you can either browse for a new model or use the current model. We'll just hit Next to use the current model. And we can see the part listed here, Wheel and Tire. Now it's time to capture the actual data that will be driven by the form inputs. So we've already captured the model down here. You can see the buttons related to the captured data. Next, we need to do dimensions and features. So I'll click that button, and you just simply click on a dimension or feature in the graphics area to add it to the list over here. And I've already named my dimensions kind of, relevant. So we've already got width down here, but you could change that if you need to, and go ahead and hit the Add button to add it to the dimensions folder. And you can also capture features, but for the purposes of this lesson, I'm going to use, configurations to drive the feature changes. So as you see here, I have a 5-spoke pattern and a 9-spoke pattern. You can see this 9-spoke pattern. We'll go back to the 5-spoke for default. If I wanted to, I could go in and create rules to turn those features on or off based on what we want to use. But just using configurations in this case is a little bit more straightforward, keeps things a little bit more simple. So that's the route we're going to take. I'm going to go ahead and continue capturing my dimensions. I'm going to go ahead and get the tire wall height here, and then the rim radius. And you can see all three are added here. Next, I want to capture some custom properties to push out to the drawing variations that we're going to generate. I've got 3 custom properties in the model. We're going to go ahead and just pick 2 of them, the drawn by and revision properties. And lastly, I do want to use configurations to drive that spoke pattern there. So I'm going to toggle yes, allow me to create rules to switch configurations. And I also want to create a drawing based on the variation as well. So just like you have to base part to generate variations of the part or model, you need to have a base drawing to do the same thing. So I'll go ahead and browse to my wheel and tire drawing right here. Just double click at the top. So that's everything we need to capture. Next step is onto the form creation itself. So each form input requires a name, and we're going to go ahead and start off with just customer input here. This would be in the form I'm going to want the customer to enter their name. So we'll just call this customer name. And it's just going to be a simple text box. So I'll go ahead and hit next again. And here's our little form preview area. And you can see that that form input right there. I can go ahead and edit that if I need to. If I want to delete it, select it and delete it. or I can even test it to see if it works the way I want. And you can see here that I've got a little exclamation saying that this isn't a valid entry, but as soon as I enter something, we're fine here. So as you do form inputs, you can go on and go through and test each one just to make sure that you've defined them as defined them correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and add our next form input. For this one, I'm going to want to do the rim diameter. So we'll call this rim diameter. We're going to do this in inches. Remember, I had that in inches instead of millimeters. And just as a side note, my model units are also in inches here. So when we get to those millimeter inputs, we're going to have to do a little bit of conversion there to get everything to inches. And I'm going to want this as a drop-down box. We have the text box, which we used before, numeric text box, drop-down, spin button, and a checkbox. We'll go through all these here in the form inputs. So we're going to do drop-down, and again, we have a little exclamation point here saying that this isn't a valid answer, and I actually already have prepared the numbers that I want to put in here representing our rim diameters. So I'm just going to paste them from my clipboard, and you can see here that each option is just separated by a return, and that we don't want this little space here that's going to show up as an empty option in the drop-down. So I'll make sure I back up there, and we can click next. I'll go ahead and test that just to make sure it looks how I want it. Yep, here are all my options. So we'll continue adding form inputs. The next thing we need to do is the wheel width. So we're going to go wheel width, and this is going to be in millimeters. And for this type, I think I'm going to want to do a numeric text box. So that just requires a minimum and maximum value. So our, I think our min value here for the wheel width we'll do, let's say 165, and for the max, maybe 320. Pretty high for a wheel width, but we'll make sure it covers everything. And we'll go on to the next one. Now this one is going to be the tire wall height, and tire wall heights are often measured as a percentage of the width. So tire wall as percentage of width, again in millimeters. Now, as a side note, when you guys are creating these form inputs, it won't let you do any special characters, and you can't start a name with a numeral. Not sure why these restrictions are in place. It probably has something to do with the way the rules and logic works, but just a side note there. So we're going to go ahead and create this as a spin button, which is similar to a numeric text box, but we also have an increment option here. And we'll do the minimum, let's say 15%, and maximum 80%. And we'll use an increment of 5. And when I go to test this spin button, we can see here it gives us a little tooltip, let us know how we need to enter the data. And if I were to just click the arrows here, you can see it goes in increments of 5. Now, that being said, it does not restrict me from entering in an odd or an even number if need be. It's just the increment is how the spin button seems to work there. So continuing on. The next thing I want to do is add a form input for the person to use the 9-spoke pattern or not. And since this is just a yes or no, true, false type thing, we're going to go ahead and make it a checkbox. So basically, if the customer wants to use 9 spokes, they will just check the box. Otherwise, the default will be the 5-spoke pattern you see in the graphics area now. And one more form input for version number. This is going to be something we send out to the drawing. And I think we're just going to make that another simple numeric text box. Minimum value of 1, we'll just do maximum value of 1,000. And there we have it. So all the form inputs we need to do for this project. And I'm going to go ahead and test one last time to set the defaults for the project. Defaults must be set so when you go into the rules creation next, it can actually have something to solve for. And you can check your equations against some kind of data point there. So for the customer name, I'm going to go ahead and enter your name here, because that's what the customer will see, and then replace it with their name. We'll just pick something default here, like 18. Maybe we'll do 200 for the wheel width, and let's do 40 for the wall height. We're going to keep the 5-spoke pattern for the default, and we'll just do a default version number of 1. So that's the default I want for my form, so I'm just going to click the Set Defaults button, and everything should be golden. So I'll continue going on here. Next one more time, and we can see that we're ready for rules. And this just kind of gives you a summary of all the rules you need and are missing. So as you can see, we have 1 for file names, 1 for configurations, 2 for custom properties, 3 for dimensions, the 3 dimensions I captured, totaling 7. We're going to want to create rules for all those, so I'll just check the box for all 7 and move on. So in the rule tree here, you can choose to display the missing rules only. As we go through and create rules with this checked, they will just disappear from the list. You can also view this in tree format. This is especially helpful when you're working with more complex assemblies rather than just a simple part like we are. I'm going to go back and use the view list. And to create a rule, all you have to do is just double click on an item there, and it brings up your rule builder. Now, inputs here are pretty straightforward if you've ever worked with logic before. Even if you haven't, it helps you out here with little tips down at the bottom for each situation. And you also have drop-downs where you can select inputs to go for your rules. These are all the form inputs we just created in the last step. We'll be using these a fair amount. You have recent stuff too if you already created some logic. Simple math, plus, minus, divided by, parentheses, ampersand, and some logic commands. Greater than, less than, equals, and if statements. We'll also be using some if statements here shortly. So let's go ahead and get into the first one. The first rule I want to do for the file name here is something very descriptive. So I want it to say the customer's name and all the specs that they picked for their wheel and tire combo right there in the file name. So it's easy to find and there are no mistakes there. So for the first input, I'm just going to do customer name. And we can see here that we use your name, which is what we entered for the default in the form. I also want to have, for us, a file name, I want to do some underscores in between all the information that I'm going to append to this name. So if you want to do specific text callouts in logic, we're going to have to do an ampersand, so it's going to say your name and then in parentheses this specific character. We're going to go with an underscore and then parentheses again. And you can see there in the result, it says your name underscore. I'm going to do this a couple times, so I'm going to go ahead and start another ampersand. I'm going to copy that little string right there to my clipboard so I can paste it real easy. And we're going to do and rim diameter, the next form input. So you can see here how it starts to build the file name, how we're looking to do here. So I'm just going to paste that next little connector, and we're going to go with wheel width. And again, another connector, tire wall height. And the last thing I want to do is put in whether the customer chose 9 spokes or 5 spokes. Now, if I were to do just 9-spoke pattern here, that's exactly what it would say no matter what. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of logic here to make sure that it's represented correctly in the file name. And we'll use an if statement for that. So the if statement is basically, if you're not familiar, it's if the first part of the logic is true or false, then do the next part of the logic, and if not, do the last part of the logic. So we'll go through that here. So if the 9-spoke pattern equals true, then let's put the words 9-spoke in there. And if not, let's put the words 5-spoke. And also you may notice that you can use as many, as many returns in between these logic statements if need be, and it still, works out just fine. So we can see here that this represents our defaults: your name, 18, 200, 40, and a 5-spoke pattern. And that's it. We're done with this rule. So it looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you can see that it is removed from the tree over here. Again, if I uncheck this, it's back. So we'll go on to the next one. This is the configuration that I want to drive. So basically the 9-spoke or the 5-spoke pattern. And just like we just saw, I'm going to use an if statement to do this. So if the 9-spoke pattern is true, meaning it is checked in the form, then we're going to use the 9 spokes configuration that I already have set up. 9 spokes is the name of it. And I could go ahead and add the 5 spokes configuration here, but it's going to be one or the other, so I can actually leave that part of the logic blank, and we'll still get the result we're looking for. We'll go ahead and click OK. Next, we're going to do the wheel width. So if this was just an inch input, I could just simply select the wheel width input right here, and that'd be it. And it'd equal 200. But since we need to do a conversion over to inches from millimeters, I'm just going to divide this by 25.4, giving us the inches. Simple as that. I'll go ahead and click OK to create that. Wall height. Now wall height is going to be a little bit more complicated, given that it's a percentage. So we're going to have to go in here, and we'll start off with the input. Wall height is as a percentage of height. But we're going to have to times that times the wheel width. And to get the correct decimal point, we're going to want to divide that by 100. And then to get the conversion change, we're going to want to go ahead and divide that again by 25.4, giving us a wall tire height for this example, a little over 3 inches. Next thing we want to do is the rim diameter. So we'll pick the rim diameter input here, and if you notice, our dimension here is actually a radius dimension. So I'm just going to go ahead and divide this by 2 to get the correct dimension. And we'll say OK. Now we have a drawn by. This is real simple. This is just for the drawing output. And I'm just going to use the customer name here for the drawn by. And lastly, revision number. And we'll just pick the revision number input there. And click OK. So there we go. All our rules have been built and showed to be valid. So we double check everything looks good there. There are no X's. So I'm going to go ahead and go next on to create actual model variant. So I'll start by entering my name. And maybe we'll do, I don't know, some type of truck tire here. So typically they have a smaller rim and a higher wheel height. Maybe usually a wider wheel too. We'll go 285 for this wheel. And for the height, let's just go 70% of that width. And I think I'm going to use this fancy 9-spoke pattern. And we'll just keep the revision number, version number there at 1. And all I have to do is click Create down here at the bottom, and SOLIDWORKS should just run through it. And you can see there that it creates my big fat truck tire and an associated drawing. And you can see here on the side, everything was checked off. So if you have some rules that are built improperly, or maybe some error happened somewhere along the lines, these are here to help you kind of root out that error and figure out exactly what the problem is. If we go in and actually look at my files here, this is exactly where the base part was located. Went ahead and just saved the new part to that. We've got wheel and tire, James Keller, and all the stuff I entered, just like I wanted. And we also have the associated drawing here. So I'll go ahead and open that so we can see it. And it's pretty simple. Got some dimensions here to call out stuff. And maybe the tech in the shop wants to assemble this wheel and tire combo, and this is just a real easy reference for him to kind of know exactly what he wants to get out of the shelves there and make it happen. You can assign part numbers and stuff as needed. This is a pretty simple example, but it just gives you an idea of what can be driven here. Go ahead and close that. And I think that about does it for DriveWorksXpress. This is a pretty simple example, but you can kind of get an idea of how powerful the tool is. And if you'd like to learn more about it, we do have an associated course in SOLIDWORKS. If you go to myigetit.com, you can browse our catalog and see a complete listing of courses, including the DriveWorksXpress course. And you can see we have some case studies in here, a few videos, give you an idea of how everything works out, show you all the form input creation rules and whatnot. And we showed you the wheel and tire, but one of the next ones we can do is a football helmet in there, if you're interested. Pretty fun project. Let's see if I can actually find an image of the helmet for you. You kind of see how it walks you through the process here. In this one you can pick, basically different face masks and different helmet sizes, along with different colors and stuff like that. It kind of drives some different things than we did there in our wheel and tire example. So there's a quick run through of some of the DriveWorksXpress options and associated course, and I get it. Hopefully you've learned a little bit today, and it'll drive you to go and explore the product and see if it'll work for you.